Ronan Hale lived alone on Selene Station, a small outpost on the far side of the moon. The station was quiet, almost too quiet. Outside, the gray lunar soil stretched endlessly, broken only by craters and the sharp shadows of the nearby mountains. Earth hung in the black sky, a small blue and white marble that seemed both close and impossibly far. Ronan often stared at it for hours, remembering a world he once knew, a world full of noise and people and chaos. Here, everything was calm, almost painfully calm. He had built his life around this quiet. Every day followed the same pattern. First, he would check the oxygen lines, making sure they were sealed and stable. Then, he would walk down to the solar arrays and inspect the panels for cracks or dust. After that, it was the maintenance bay, where he repaired mining drones and checked machinery for hidden faults. Each task was small, each task important, and each task was something he understood. He liked that. He liked knowing what he could fix, knowing he could survive with his hands and his mind. The walls of Selene Station were lined with tools, spare parts, and old books he had brought from Earth. He often read the same books over and over, not because he was bored, but because the stories reminded him of something familiar, something warm. Even in the silence of space, he found comfort in those words. Ronan was not a young man. His hair had streaks of silver, and his face was lined with years of hard work and quiet worry. He did not mind the loneliness. At first, it had been difficult. The isolation had pressed on him like the heavy weight of the moon's gravity. But over time, he had learned to enjoy his own company. He had learned to listen to the quiet, to hear the small things, the hum of the life support systems, the soft crackle of static in the old radio, the faint vibration of machinery through the floor. In those small sounds, he found life. Some nights, he would float in the observation deck, staring at the stars. They were endless, countless points of light in the blackness. He often wondered if anyone else saw them the way he did, if anyone else felt the strange mix of fear and awe that he felt. On one particularly dark night, a shadow passed over the moon's surface, far off in the distance. It was small, barely noticeable, but it made Ronan pause. He leaned closer to the glass, squinting. Nothing moved after that, and he shook his head. Probably just a rock kicked up by lunar winds, he told himself. But the shadow stayed in the corner of his mind, like a question with no answer. Ronan's meals were simple. Mostly rehydrated packets of protein, some powdered vegetables, and occasional treats sent from Earth before supplies ran low. He ate alone, usually in the small kitchen area, listening to the quiet hiss of the station's air filters. Sometimes he would talk to himself, quietly, almost like practicing conversations that would never happen. It was a strange comfort, to speak aloud and hear a voice other than the hum of machines. Despite the quiet, life on Selene Station was not easy. Equipment failed often. Pipes cracked. Drones broke down. Each problem could be dangerous, sometimes deadly, if ignored. Ronan had learned to trust his own judgment, his own hands. No one else was here to fix things. No one else was here to help. He had no choice but to succeed, because failure meant more than broken machinery, it could mean death. One morning, as he ran his routine checks on the solar panels, something caught his eye. A faint flicker in the shadows beyond the station. At first, he thought it was a trick of the sun, a reflection off the jagged rocks. But then he noticed movement, subtle, deliberate. He froze, hand resting on the panel's edge, eyes scanning the horizon. Nothing. Just the gray dust and deep shadows of the moon's surface. Ronan shook his head and muttered to himself. Just the wind. Just shadows. He wanted to believe it. He wanted to keep his quiet life. But part of him couldn't ignore the feeling that something was coming, something he had never seen before. It was a small whisper in his mind, a flicker of unease. He pushed the thought aside and went back to work, checking the oxygen lines, tightening bolts, testing circuits. Routine calmed him. Routine kept him alive. Even as he worked, he thought about Earth, about the noise and chaos he had left behind. He thought about people laughing, arguing, living lives full of mistakes and courage. He missed it sometimes. But mostly, he liked the quiet. He liked knowing that here, on this lonely outpost, he was in control. No one to interfere, no one to complicate life. Just him, his machines, and the gray lunar dust stretching endlessly into the horizon. And yet, in that quiet, a question lingered, a small, restless feeling he could not shake. Something was out there. Something that would change everything. Ronan had barely finished his morning checks when the first sign appeared. A strange shimmer on the horizon, barely noticeable at first, made him pause. He squinted through the observation deck's thick glass. At first, he thought it was a reflection, maybe the sunlight glinting off the distant craters. But the shimmer moved, slowly at first, then faster, like something alive. He pressed his forehead against the glass and held his breath. 10 massive shapes were rising from the lunar plains, their bodies catching the sunlight in ways no metal or rock could. They were enormous, much larger than any human-made ship. Scales glimmered like gemstones in colors he had never seen, and wings, wide and powerful, cast long shadows across the gray dust. Ronan stumbled back, heart pounding. Dragons. Real dragons. The thought repeated in his head, almost like a chant he couldn't believe. Impossible, yet here they are. His hands shook slightly as he fumbled for his radio, tapping out a signal that would go nowhere. No one on Earth would believe this. No one had ever believed dragons existed outside of stories and myths. And yet, here they were, 10 of them, landing carefully around Selene Station. The ground trembled slightly under their weight. Dust rose in slow clouds, and small stones tumbled down the slopes nearby. Each dragon had a different shape and color. Some had scales that looked like crystal, transparent and glowing faintly from within. Others were dark, almost black, with eyes that shone like molten gold. One dragon, smaller than the rest, had a soft silver glow that made it almost look fragile. Ronan swallowed hard and forced himself to move. Fear pressed against his chest, heavy and real. But beneath it, a strange thrill stirred. He had always lived quietly, alone, working with machines and metal. But now, something extraordinary had arrived at his door. He could run, he could hide, he could try to survive. Or, he could face it. The first dragon moved closer, its massive head tilting slightly, studying him with eyes that seemed almost intelligent. Ronan froze. He felt a vibration in the floor, a low hum that seemed to come from the dragon itself. The dragon opened its mouth, but it did not roar. Instead, a sound came out, low and musical, a rhythm he could feel in his chest. It was a strange kind of communication, not words, but almost like a song that asked questions. Ronan's mind raced. Could they understand him? Could he understand them? He wanted to step back, but his curiosity rooted him in place. He reached slowly for a nearby control panel, pressing buttons to activate the station's external cameras. Every angle he could find, he observed the dragons carefully. They did not attack. They moved with grace, circling the station, exploring without fear. They were cautious, but they were not hostile. One dragon, the silver one, stepped forward more than the others. It lowered its head, eyes locked on Ronan. For a moment, he felt as if it were peering into his mind, reading his thoughts. Loneliness. Survival. Fear. And, strangely, courage. He had no weapons beyond his tools and his machines. But somehow, the dragon seemed to sense that he was not weak. Ronan exhaled slowly. He had a choice to make. He could barricade himself inside, seal the station, and hope the dragons left. Or he could try something no human had ever done, reach out to them. His fingers moved toward the small hatch that led to the maintenance bay. He pulled out a flare, the kind miners used to mark areas for repair. He hesitated, then activated it. The red light shot into the darkness. The silver dragon paused, then moved closer, wings folding neatly at its sides. The others followed cautiously, circling and observing. Ronan felt his heart race, but he forced himself to stay calm. Slowly, he extended a hand. The silver dragon lowered its snout, almost brushing it against his glove. Ronan's breath caught. This was real. This was happening. He could feel the warmth of life, the strength of something ancient and powerful, and the gentle trust forming between them. Then, a sudden roar echoed across the plains, deep and commanding. The other dragons responded instantly, forming a protective circle around the silver one. Dust rose in waves, and Ronan could barely see through the haze. He stumbled back, gripping the control panel for balance. Something told him the dragons were not just creatures, they were intelligent, aware, and ready for what might come next. Ronan took a deep breath. He had spent years living quietly, alone, fixing broken machines and surviving day by day. But this was beyond anything he had ever faced. His mind raced with plans. Could he help them? Could he keep them safe? And if he tried, would he survive the effort? The dragon's eyes seemed to meet his again, and for the first time, Ronan felt a strange certainty. He was not alone anymore. Whatever came next, he would face it. Not as a lonely mechanic, but as a human who refused to step back. His quiet life had ended, yes. But in its place, something new had begun, a chance to stand beside creatures that defied belief, to protect them, and to prove that courage was not about size or strength, it was about heart. Ronan wiped sweat from his brow and started moving toward the main airlock. He did not know what would happen next. The dragons waited, patient but alert. The station's lights reflected off their scales, turning the interior into a strange, magical glow. For the first time in years, Ronan felt excitement. Fear was still there, but it was mixed with wonder. Something extraordinary had landed on the moon, and he would meet it head-on. The quiet had ended. Ronan had never imagined anything like this. The dragons were here, massive and alive, and yet they were not attacking. They moved around Selene Station with a strange intelligence, curious and cautious at the same time. He watched them carefully, noting their patterns. Some circled above, their wings stirring dust and small stones. Others explored the landing area, stepping lightly despite their size. The silver dragon, the smallest of the 10, stayed close to the station. Its eyes seemed to follow him wherever he went. Ronan felt a strange connection, as if it was trying to communicate. He remembered the vibrations he had felt when it first approached. That low, musical hum had continued whenever it drew near. Now, he thought he understood a little, the dragons were aware, intelligent, and maybe even sentient. He decided to try something daring. Carefully, he opened the hatch to the maintenance bay, keeping his movements slow and deliberate. The silver dragon tilted its head, watching him, its glowing eyes reflecting the light of the station. Ronan stepped outside, holding a small piece of metal, a tool he had just repaired. He offered it to the dragon, not knowing if it understood the gesture. The silver dragon sniffed at the metal, then nudged it gently with its snout. Ronan's heart raced. This was trust. Small, tentative, but trust. Encouraged, he reached into his bag and pulled out a container of protein paste, one of his limited supplies. He held it out. The dragon hesitated, then delicately took some with its tongue. Ronan exhaled slowly. This was the beginning. Over the next hours, he worked carefully, creating small shelters from spare parts and panels. He patched together a protective area for the dragons, something to shield them from the harsh lunar wind and radiation. The other dragons, though wary at first, began to approach as well, circling curiously and testing the barriers he had built. Ronan spoke to them softly, even though he knew they could not understand words. His tone mattered. Calm, confident, steady. For the first time in years, Ronan felt alive in a way he had never known. Here he was, a simple mechanic, facing the impossible. These dragons were powerful, ancient beings, yet they allowed him near. They trusted him in a way that humans often did not. He felt a mixture of awe and responsibility. He could not fail them. If he did, they might die. And if they died, he would carry that failure forever. He noticed something remarkable. The dragons were not just intelligent, they were adaptable. One of the black-scaled dragons picked up a loose panel and carried it toward the shelter. Another used its tail to move a heavy beam that had blocked part of the entrance. Ronan realized they were learning from him, understanding the ways of this small, fragile station. And he was learning from them. As the hours passed, he began to understand their ways, their habits. The dragons were cautious but curious. They were strong but gentle when they chose to be. They were not simply beasts, they were thinking, feeling creatures. Ronan's respect for them grew. And in return, their trust in him grew. He could feel it in the way they approached him, the way their eyes followed his movements, the way they responded to his gestures. Then something unexpected happened. A loud rumble echoed across the lunar plains, distant but unmistakable. One of the dragons stiffened, wings spreading wide, and the others followed suit. Ronan froze. His mind raced. What could it be? Another human? A machine? Danger? He had no time to consider. He realized the dragons were looking at him, waiting for a signal, as if they trusted him to decide what to do. Ronan took a deep breath and stood tall. He raised his hand, not in fear, but in determination. The dragons mirrored him in a strange way, lowering their bodies slightly as if ready to move, ready to follow. He felt a surge of courage. He was just one human, small and fragile in comparison, but he could make a difference. He could protect them. He began giving instructions, simple gestures, pointing to areas of the shelter, showing the dragons how to move obstacles and stay together. At first, it seemed they did not understand, but gradually, they followed. One by one, each dragon learned, each dragon trusted him more. The bond was forming. He could feel it in his chest, a strange warmth that came with responsibility and hope. That night, Selene Station glowed with quiet activity. The dragons huddled in their shelters, wings folded, breathing softly. Ronan sat in the observation deck, looking at them, listening to the soft vibrations that seemed almost like purring. He realized he was no longer alone. He had allies, creatures far beyond human imagination, but creatures who depended on him and trusted him. For the first time in his life, Ronan felt a sense of purpose deeper than survival. He was not just fixing machines anymore. He was guarding life, guiding the lost, standing between them and the dangers he did not yet fully understand. His quiet life had ended, but in its place, something extraordinary had begun. Ronan looked up at Earth, shining far away, and whispered to himself, "I will keep you safe. No matter what comes." And for the first time in years, he believed it. Ronan had just finished reinforcing the shelters for the dragons when the first warning appeared on the station's sensors. A flickering light blinked urgently on the control panel. He leaned in, squinting at the readout. It showed multiple fast-moving objects approaching from the horizon. Not natural, not accidental. Ships. Human-made, armed, and dangerous. He felt his chest tighten. The mining fleet. He had expected solitude here, quiet work, a life of small victories against broken machinery. He had never imagined facing enemies like this, well-armed humans intent on capturing or killing dragons for profit. And now, they were coming straight for Selene Station. The dragons sensed it too. The silver one, perched near the main shelter, let out a low hum that vibrated through Ronan's chest. The other dragons spread their wings, circling protectively around the station. Their movements were deliberate, precise, almost as if they understood the danger better than Ronan himself. He realized, in that moment, that they were counting on him. They trusted him to make the right choice. Ronan had no weapons beyond his repair tools and the station's drones, old machines meant for fixing mining equipment, not fighting battles. But he refused to panic. Fear was a luxury he could not afford. He took a deep breath, moving quickly to the control panel, running through every system he could use. Solar-powered turrets, drone launchers, mechanical traps, he began activating them, improvising defenses as fast as he could. The first wave of ships appeared over the horizon, sharp silhouettes against the black sky. Laser beams cut through the lunar dust, sending clouds of gray spiraling across the plains. Ronan's heart pounded, but he forced himself to stay focused. He directed the drones to block entrances, to herd the dragons into safe areas. He moved quickly between control stations, adjusting shields and rerouting power to critical systems. Every decision could mean life or death for the dragons and for himself. The dragons acted instinctively, supporting him in ways he had not imagined. One of the black dragons grabbed a fallen solar panel with its tail, sliding it into a position to block a direct laser strike. Another dragon lifted a small shelter and nudged it into place to shield the silver dragon. Ronan watched, astonished. These creatures, ancient and powerful, were willing to cooperate with a human. They were learning, following his lead, and trusting him completely. A massive laser shot tore across the lunar surface, narrowly missing one of the shelters. Dust and debris flew into the air. Ronan ducked, heart hammering. He shouted orders, his voice echoing in the empty station. Move left. Shield the silver one. Keep the drones in formation. Amazingly, the dragons obeyed, not because they understood his words, but because they felt his intent, his courage, his determination to protect them. Ronan realized then that courage was contagious. It could be felt, even by creatures who had never known humans. And in that moment, he understood that he was more than a mechanic. He was their leader, their protector, their hope. He could not fail. Failure would not just be his own, it would be theirs. The ships moved closer, weapons trained on the station. One of the larger dragons let out a roar so deep it shook the ground. Ronan felt it in his bones, and the sound seemed to ripple toward the incoming fleet. The ships faltered slightly, confused by the display of power. Another dragon joined in, creating a wave of sound that disoriented the machines and delayed their attack. Ronan saw his chance. He directed the drones to launch small energy pulses, not enough to destroy the ships, but enough to scramble their targeting systems. He adjusted the shields, leading the dragons in a coordinated defense. The silver dragon flew low, its glow cutting through the dust as it drew fire away from the weaker shelters. The other dragons followed, moving with precision that rivaled the drones themselves. Hours seemed to pass like minutes. The battle was chaotic, dangerous, and exhausting. But Ronan never faltered. Every decision, every movement, every command was measured and deliberate. He learned quickly, adapting to the dragons' abilities, using their strength to compensate for the station's weakness. By late lunar night, the mining fleet began to retreat. They realized they were outmatched, not just by dragons, but by a human who refused to bow, who refused to fear, who refused to give up. When silence returned, the dust settled, and the shields powered down, Ronan sank to the floor of the control room. Sweat dripped from his brow, and his hands shook from exhaustion. He looked out at the dragons. They were unharmed, circling slowly, their eyes reflecting trust and gratitude. The silver dragon approached him and lowered its head. Ronan reached out, placing his hand gently on its snout. "You're safe," he whispered. "We made it." For the first time since the dragons arrived, he allowed himself to feel relief. The battle had been won, but he knew it was only the beginning. They were out here, alone, far from Earth, and more threats could come at any moment. Yet, in that moment, he also realized something important: courage was stronger than fear. It could guide, protect, and even unite humans and dragons against impossible odds. Ronan finally understood the truth he had felt since they arrived. His quiet life, his solitary routines, had prepared him in ways he never imagined. He had learned patience, observation, and careful thinking. He had learned to survive alone. And now, that experience, combined with his courage, had saved 10 dragons. He looked at the lunar horizon, where the stars seemed sharper than ever, and he felt something he hadn't felt in years: hope. The dragons had trusted him. The machines had obeyed him. And he had faced a threat that no ordinary human could have handled. His quiet life was gone. In its place was something extraordinary, a bond between species, a test of courage, and the knowledge that one human could truly make a difference. Ronan stood tall, brushing dust from his clothes, and whispered, "We're just getting started." The silence that followed the retreat of the mining fleet felt strange and heavy. Dust still swirled in lazy clouds across the lunar plains, settling slowly around Selene Station. Ronan stood on the observation deck, looking out at the dragons. 10 enormous creatures, each one magnificent in its own way, hovered calmly near the shelters he had built. Their wings folded neatly, tails flicking softly, eyes bright with intelligence and trust. Ronan exhaled, letting the tension leave his body, but the weight of responsibility still pressed on him. He had survived the attack, yes, but this was only the beginning. The dragons were not machines, they were living beings with thoughts, emotions, and needs. And now, they were relying on him, a single human, to guide and protect them. The silver dragon approached him first, moving with a grace that made Ronan's heart catch. Its eyes, glowing softly in the dim light of the station, seemed to study him carefully. It lowered its head, nudging his hand gently with its snout. Ronan placed his palm against the warm, smooth scales, feeling the heartbeat of something ancient and powerful beneath his fingertips. In that moment, he understood the depth of what had happened. He had earned their trust. Not by force, not by luck, but by courage. He looked around at the other dragons. Some were crystalline, glimmering in the light of Selene Station's lamps. Others were dark, shadowy, their scales reflecting the faint glow of Earth above. One by one, they began to circle the station, their movements deliberate, almost ceremonial. Ronan felt awe rising in him. These were not mere creatures. They were intelligent, noble, and perhaps even capable of understanding humanity in a way he could not yet grasp. He began to speak softly, telling them about the station, about himself, about Earth. He did not know if they could understand words, but he hoped they understood intent, emotion, and truth. The dragons listened, or at least they seemed to, tilting their heads, flaring their nostrils, and letting out soft hums that vibrated through the floor. Ronan smiled despite himself. He had gone from a quiet, lonely mechanic to a bridge between species, a human who had proven that courage and empathy could matter even in the cold, empty expanse of space. Days passed, and the bond between Ronan and the dragons grew stronger. He taught them to navigate the outpost safely, to rest without damaging the delicate systems, and even to play with the drones in ways that mimic teamwork. In return, the dragons showed him abilities he could barely comprehend, sensing dangers long before they arrived, manipulating lunar dust and small rocks with precision, and communicating through vibrations and glances. Each day, Ronan's admiration and respect for them deepened. Word of his deeds eventually reached Earth. Remote communications channels buzzed with astonishment and disbelief. Scientists, media, and government officials all wanted to know more, but Ronan had little time for them. His life was here, with the dragons, and he knew that trying to explain the extraordinary would only slow him down. He needed to protect the dragons, teach them to survive, and maintain Selene Station. That was enough. Then, one night, a new signal appeared on the radar, this one faint, distant, but unmistakable. Other humans were coming, but not like the mining fleet. These were explorers, observers, perhaps even allies. Ronan realized that humanity had finally begun to notice what he and the dragons had accomplished. But more importantly, he understood that humans could rise to challenges beyond imagination, not through machines alone, but through courage, intelligence, and empathy. He walked among the dragons, feeling the soft vibrations of their hums through the floor. One by one, they nudged him, as if acknowledging his role, his leadership, and the trust he had earned. Ronan felt something swell inside him, pride, yes, but also hope. For centuries, humanity had been small, fragile, and often afraid. But here, on the moon, a single human had changed the course of 10 dragons' lives. And in doing so, he had shown what humans were capable of: bravery, compassion, and ingenuity in the face of the impossible. The silver dragon stepped forward, lowering its head until its snout rested gently against Ronan's shoulder. He closed his eyes, feeling the warmth and strength of life so unlike his own, yet connected to him in a way he could not explain. He realized that the dragons were not just creatures to be protected, they were partners, allies, perhaps even friends. And in protecting them, he had discovered a new purpose for himself. The lunar horizon glowed faintly with earthlight, painting Selene Station and the dragons in soft shades of blue and gray. Ronan looked at the stars beyond, knowing that the universe was vast and full of dangers he could not yet imagine. But he also knew that courage was more powerful than fear, and that one human, guided by heart and intelligence, could change the fate of those who seemed far beyond help. Ronan Hale had once been a quiet mechanic, a man content with solitude and routine. Now, he was a guardian, a teacher, a symbol of human courage. 10 dragons had trusted him, not because he was strong, but because he had chosen to face fear, to act with intelligence and compassion, and to never give up. That choice had changed everything, for the dragons, for himself, and perhaps, for all of humanity. As he watched the dragons settle for the night, wings folded, eyes glowing softly, Ronan whispered to himself, "We are ready for whatever comes next." And for the first time in his life, he believed it completely. The quiet life was gone, but in its place was something far greater, a life of courage, purpose, and a bond that could reshape the stars themselves.